Hello again, my friends. My name is Carpo, in case you didn't already know. And I usually only introduce myself in videos that I know might get views from people other than my usual subscribers. And I don't usually intend to reach a wider audience unless I'm talking about something important, as I am here. Now, a couple days ago I made a video about my father and how he passed away from lung cancer, carcinoma, and it spread to his liver and the rest of his body. And how my father was in Vietnam, stationed in Cam Ranh Bay, and how I believe that it contributed to his death, the Agent Orange that was sprayed as a defoliant. Naturally, since then, even though I'd done plenty of studies on this before and research as much as I could, about every year and a half, I go back and I look at the new information about what happened and the new information that's come out about Agent Orange. And only in recent years have new videos surfaced of, say, Vietnam, and I've looked to see if I could find him in any of these videos, because he passed away when I was about 15. Now, I kind of let it go. He passed away. It is what it is. And I'm 43 now. So it's been almost 30 years. And it's not that I am a vindictive person that wants to say, oh, it's the military's fault that my father passed away. But as I said in the video before, I do want people who were aware of the dangers of using dioxin as a defoliant held responsible. It wasn't used responsibly. And then my mother sent me a text message. We were talking about it, and she said that she remembered my dad had told her one time that after the Agent Orange, they called it Agent Orange because the barrels had an orange stripe on them. They were 50-gallon drums. And he said that after they were done, the barrels were empty, they'd take them back to the barracks and use them for showers. And they wouldn't even clean them out first. The thing is, when you're in the fog of war, you don't care much about how you're damaging your body or your genetics. You think you're going to die anyway. Now, that coming from me, a guy who's never been in war, who refused to join the military, maybe you would say that I have really no say in this, but I'm speaking for the veterans that I've talked to, for the veterans in my family that have suffered. And so this video is going to deal with some very specific things that our military has done against its own soldiers and people. And as I was watching a few videos about Agent Orange, I naturally got into some research articles and found out that it spreads through genetics down to your children and grandchildren. Dioxin can stay in the bloodstream for a long time, and especially women who were in Vietnam were the most susceptible. I'm going to start with World War I. We used mustard gas, and it was a nasty business. That stuff is gross, disgusting. When we fast forward, I'm not going to get into World War I because I haven't done a whole lot of research on that. When you move to World War II, before World War II, as it was breaking out, as it was occurring, several different what are now Allied countries, they wanted to know more about mustard gas and the effects on their own soldiers. So the U.S. government, the U.S. military decided they wanted to do testing on its own soldiers to see the effects of mustard gas. But they did it on a division of race. They had blacks, Puerto Ricans, whites, and they would send them into these rooms and they would pipe mustard gas into the rooms. People would come out coughing and feeling like crap and sick. Sometimes they would put it on their skin to see how they reacted. And their goal was to say, well, different races will probably react differently to this, and they wanted to find the soldier that could resist mustard gas the most. During that time, 60,000 soldiers were exposed to mustard gas to see the effects. Now, these are U.S. soldiers stationed in America. These tests were done here in the States. Our own soldiers were harmed. It wasn't much longer after that where the LSD tests were done, where soldiers were given LSD to see what the effects would be. And, of course, it made them not want to probably go to war. Won't get into that detail. There are studies and videos you can watch of the soldiers who took LSD. But the point being here that they were the guinea pigs. The shameful thing is that these tests were done as They basically had to sign off. They didn't know what they were getting into. And afterwards, they signed a non-disclosure agreement, so they couldn't say a thing about it. Same thing happened to the atomic veterans of World War II. The ones that were sent to clean up the sites or to watch the nukes explode, and then they were sent to these islands to clean up the site, and were never told what danger radiation posed. Back then, they were still learning about it, but the government knew damn well what was going on. They couldn't talk about it either. And the worst thing, they were denied compensation because there was no way for them to prove what they were really doing, because it was, under the books. So we move forward. These things keep happening. The Korean War. Let's move to Vietnam. Now, Vietnam was a horrible time, because if you want to know why our country goes to war, I would urge you to do more research. If you're the kind of person who supports the U.S. and says, yeah, we're a winner of wars, look at Vietnam. We lost Vietnam. We abandoned Vietnam. North Vietnam came down, took Saigon. The last Marines were airlifted off of the embassy, and they killed millions. Overall, millions of people died in that war because of us and because of the Vietnam, North and South Vietnam. You couldn't tell who the enemy was. It was guerrilla warfare. There were, and so a person thinks, well, why were we there? You start asking, I don't know. Why were we in Vietnam? Why the hell were we there? Well, there was a ship called the USS Maddox, and it was stationed off the coast of Vietnam. And apparently, there was a day when they claimed that they were being attacked by torpedoes from Vietnam. And they found on radar, or sonar rather, 26 incoming torpedoes. Which was interesting, because at the time, their Navy only had 12 warships, and each one could only carry 2 torpedoes. So even if they had every ship aimed, it was still, the math didn't add up, it was still too short. Point being, the captain of the ship, the Maddox, said later, whoa, I think that there may be an error here. I don't think that we're really under attack. In the end, the U.S. was never really attacked by Vietnam. I mean, they would be fools to do so. But what we needed was a pretense to go to war. And a person may ask why. And I would say I don't understand the deeper reasons why we went to war there. They claimed it was to stop the spread of communism. But in reality, there was money involved, as there always is. In World War II, the reason why we went in, it wasn't because of Japan or Pearl Harbor. As sad as it sounds, it was because J.P. Morgan actually was financing for the Rothschilds, and they were making up to $10 million a day off of the war bonds over in France and in Europe. And when those countries started suffering bombings and they started losing, he said, oh my God, we're going to lose all our investment. And so they convinced Congress and the American people to go to war. And a lot of folks would say that Pearl Harbor's a false flag. That's a debatable issue. We did receive these encoded messages. The question is whether we decoded them or not. The whole point is that it wouldn't be surprising if we allowed Pearl Harbor to happen as a pretense to go to war, because it happened before. In World War I, we sent over a ship called the Lusitania. We told their guard ship to leave. We sent them into U-boat territory. It was loaded with 1,200 passengers that perished, as well as the whole cargo of explosives and ammunition, which nobody knew was on board. Somebody basically sent a ship into waters where they knew it would be attacked in order, as a pretense, to fight against the Germans and go to war. This whole thing goes really deep, and honestly, nobody knows the full depth of what a false flag, how deep these things go. And now I start feeling like I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but let me say, I spent 20 years on these things. I'm not a newbie to false flags or conspiracies. I was really deep into it for like 10 years. And then I walked away saying, okay, not everything is a conspiracy. But now I've had time to really think about which ones are. And, the war issue has never been proven wrong. And you may ask why, the fact that they're fucking the soldiers over. And why am I making this video? It's because I have been contacted by so many veterans. You wouldn't believe it. Not just because of the videos I've made, but just in general, that, with being a kratom vendor, I have people saying, oh, I'm a veteran, I'm disabled, I had all these problems. And they want to tell me their life story. and I listen because I care. It's really hard though, because some people have such painful stories about what their situation is with the VA or the military or the U.S. government, and it's sad. What they're doing to their soldiers is just abhorrent. I don't know how else to define it. That was Vietnam. They sprayed not just Agent Orange. Agent Orange wasn't just dioxin. It was what they called the rainbow cocktail of several different colored labels of many different defoliants. They were mixing these compounds, which even makes them worse and more toxic. And they're persistent. They stay in your system for years and pass them down to your children. And, hundreds of thousands of people were exposed to this stuff. In that war, 1.5 million Vietnamese died and 58,000 U.S. soldiers died. That is probably... and that does not include anyone who died after they came home from either suicide or complications from Agent Orange or the rainbow cocktail. And so they never include that on the wall. The Vietnam Wall would be much bigger. It'd be probably 3 or 4 times as big if you include all the people who suffered afterwards because of that. Maybe even more. I don't know. And I can't speculate. But we move forward to Iran and the Gulf War. Now, there was sarin gas and cyclosarin, which was, soldiers were constantly exposed to these things, as well as these burn pits. And many people, 250,000 soldiers, they believe, were actually, U.S. soldiers, were exposed to this. And they were also pumped full of vaccines. Like Roberta mentioned on the channel the other day, she mentioned how they were pumped full of vaccines before, they were sent over. That's exactly what happens. And so you have your body's, fighting with all these new vaccines at the same time as being sent to a new climate. And of course your body is suffering. Your immune system is down. And you have many other problems, dysentery, and the whole thing is that you try to inoculate yourself against all these things, but in the process, who knows what kind of damage is being done. The thing is, if vaccines are necessary for soldiers, fine, so be it. But why are we sending soldiers over there in the first place? We know that the pretense for the original war, Gulf War, was bullshit. And then we know that along comes Iraq. And this is the saddest part. There's a company called KBR, and they were hired as a subcontractor for the U.S. government. And many of these soldiers that were working around this particular site, they were exposed to something called sodium dichromate. You may know sodium dichromate as I believe it was the chemical that Erin Brockovich's story, when she exposed the toxin in the water, it was sodium dichromate, and a lot of people were getting sick. Well, over there it was just sitting in open pits, and nobody was doing anything about it. A lot of soldiers got sick. They've been fighting this claim for years in litigation in court. Finally, I think it was this year or just last year, they came through and they were denied their claims, even though they had proved they were exposed to this stuff. And the idea was that KBR was not held responsible because they were a military subcontractor. Think about that for a minute. This is the problem with privatization of army. Nobody is held liable. Oh, it was his fault. It was his fault. So thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of soldiers were exposed to various chemicals in these wars, and nobody's doing anything about it. And here's another one: burn pits. If any of you have been to Iraq, you probably know about burn pits. Right next to every single camp is a burn pit where they burn everything: plastics, tires, explosive remnants, chunks of shrapnel, entire cars, body parts, rubber, metals, jet fuel, anything that they have, they burn it in those pits. And the soldiers say that the soot just blows right into their camp. It's constantly, they're immersed in it, and when they came home, they've been having all these issues. Apparently, jet fuel, when it's used to ignite these piles, if it's incompletely burned, the byproducts can be super toxic. And who's liable for this? It's irresponsible. You're in the desert, you could move the burn pits out of ways, hire a proper cleanup crew to do these things. But no, it's another country, so everyone suffers. And unfortunately, that includes our people, And for what? What have we gained? What have we gained from any of these wars? Does anybody speak positively about any war? And I thought about this. I was like, do we really feel like heroes? You know? There's three main problems with a lot of these issues that the soldiers go through when they're exposed. First off, they're sworn to secrecy on a lot of these missions. Second off, they're denied benefits a lot because only certain conditions apply when they come back. And they're punished for speaking out. If you're down there and you're a whistleblower in the military while you're fighting on the front lines, that's not a good sign. You're supposed to be, you know, following orders, doing your job. And I don't blame soldiers for just sticking it out and doing what you're told to do, because that's your only option when you're out there. You can't just say fuck you to the U.S. government. You're going to go to prison for it. You know, you'll get court-martialed. And, you know, when I was a kid, I'll never forget, you know, the commercials that came on for the Army. Be all that you can be. Find your future in the Army. That was the line, over and over. Be all you can be? Is that really it? And I have friends that joined the military. Not many, but my one friend came back really fucked up. He was in a Humvee, he was a gunner, and he watched all his buddies get blown up in front of him. And it just changed him, you know? And the people who profit on war, the warmongers, you know, it's sad that we really can convince the American people that we're fighting for a cause, for a purpose. And we're not. We are not. If you really think ISIS is a threat to America, and that we can just end that by going overseas and just blowing up a few terrorists, it doesn't work that way. We found it doesn't work that way. It's an excuse for these companies to profit massively. And no American wants to admit that all of these wars have been for profit. Because by doing that, it kind of negates what the country stands for. You know, freedom, democracy. But that's the wool that's been pulled over the people's eyes. They have used that since, you know, look back at all the wars. Do the research. You know, do your homework on it and see that every war has been fought because of fear of communism. And after that fizzled out, now it's fear of terrorism. It's always something. And there have been enough false flags and enough fake attacks to where I'm convinced that, you know, there are no wars worth fighting for the U.S. government or the U.S. military. There are no wars worth fighting. The rest of the world is trying to get along, and here we are, fighting wars in the 21st century. And the people are paying the price. I'd like to say one thing. You know, people use the soldier, you know, well, you've got to support your troops. That was a huge thing during the Iraq War. If you said anything bad about the war, then you weren't supporting your troops. And that's complete bullshit. A uniform does not make a hero. There are plenty of people out there who wear a uniform because they want to kill. And they go out and they slaughter innocent people. Not every soldier is a hero just because you're over there fighting a war. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. But a lot of people are, and they do mean well, and they want to help. They want to fix the problems in our country by stopping the bad guy. And that's a natural human tendency. It's the propaganda that gets to them. And when you come back, you have a cognitive dissonance about wanting to say, yes, I supported my country, and oh shit, I killed a bunch of innocent people that didn't deserve to die. And so no leader knows all the details of what's going on in the world. They send off the pawns to die. And we have to remember that. You know, real people who have been to war, they don't want war. What does that tell you? You know? The people, the soldiers, the leaders, the military leaders, any of them who aren't compromised by money, they will tell you that war sucks and it's horrible and there's no gain and we never win. Why don't we listen? Because there's too much money to be made. Weapons, missiles, all these things make profit. So we create an enemy and then we dehumanize that enemy. Whether it be the Mexicans, the Arabs, the terrorists, the Comanches back in the day, you know, the Indians, the natives, the wild men, whatever you want to call people. If you replace that word with the enemy, whatever we define the enemy as, replace that word with human. You'll see where I'm coming from. You know, humans attacked a building, not terrorists. It's the words that get people, and you have to remember that there's a reason why things happen, and we can't just stop it through force. If you can prove me wrong and show me where force has ever really, stopped problems, I'd be more than glad to hear it. But the one thing I'd like to really address here before I go the whole talk about how liberals are weak and Democrats don't want protection and they want open borders and don't want security, that's complete fucking bullshit, and all of you know it. Anybody who's extremely on the right who believes that Democrats think that way, it's not true. Most people, and I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent. I used to identify as a Democrat because I felt forced into it, but I don't. I think that they have disgusted their own party, just like the Republicans have, and everybody is basically just following suit, doing whatever works for the corporations. It's not about left and right. It's about center, and the center is the corporations. They're the ones who are profiting. And if you can win congressional approval on something to go to war, all you have to do is create one event that makes the American people think, we want revenge. It's buying into that primal human nature to fight back and get revenge. So nationalism is used as an excuse for war. And we say, if you don't support the war, if you don't support our troops, if you don't support the military, then you don't support America. And that is complete bullshit. And anybody who thinks that knows that that's bullshit, and should if they don't. But dehumanizing the enemy is the first step. Then use nationalism. But regardless of whether you're left or right or center, the one thing we have to remember is every single American would want to fight for their land. Believe me, if another country invaded our borders, there would be Democrats and conservatives side by side with their rifles in the streets defending their territory. So to think that without these, extremists on the right, that, the world wouldn't be safe, Democrats like guns too, It's not about liking them, it's about knowing that we would defend ourselves, whatever method we had to, because we all care about the country we live in. You know what I mean? But sending people overseas, think about how many soldiers have died in wars that we don't even understand. Now imagine if we had never sent them over. What if we had been invaded or some other country had grown? Do you think we would have lost as many as we have lost? I don't know. What about innocent civilians and bystanders? How do you justify and defend that? They call them expendable, casualties of war. So we had communism as the enemy, now we have terrorism. The question is, what makes an enemy? What makes an enemy? Ask yourself that for a minute. An election year is an excuse for a war. And that should make us think twice about what we defend. The propaganda to convince the public that there's some faceless enemy that we need to fight against, or giving it a face, it makes people, humans, seem so absurd. And so if you replace the word communist or terrorist with angry people, you'll see what I'm talking about, but the words are what get people caught up. There are some fucked up people out there that want to hurt us as a country, and there are some fucked up people that want to hurt each other as individuals. So we try to create laws and we try to put out regulations to prevent these people from taking advantage. But how many people do you really think out there are worth sending our soldiers over to other countries to fight? Hey, that's the war part. But why are we exposing our own soldiers to toxins, chemicals that we don't have to? I think the U.S. military needs to pay for their ignorance. The fact that they try to pawn this off on subcontractors, I think, is absurd. I think it's disgusting. And that's all I can really say about it. I should just finish it here. Because, I obviously have a bias. I'm frustrated because my father was, I believe, killed by Agent Orange. But that's not my only reason for this. It's the other stories that I've heard from veterans. I've never heard a single veteran say, I went to Iraq and fought for my country, and I'm glad we killed all those guys. When you're in the fog of war, you do some fucked up shit. But when you come back and you think it through, most of the people, everybody I've talked to who's been in the war has said, wow, yeah, these people were angry and they were frustrated, but it wasn't worth going over there to fight. I guess that's an opinion, a subjective opinion, and since I wasn't there, I wouldn't know. But war sucks, And using our soldiers as pawns disgusts me. And I can't see any excuse for it. And so that's my vocalization of how I feel about it. So be all you can be. Find your future in the, corporatocracy, It's all profits for weapons manufacturers, and it's pretty disgusting. So talk to y'all later. Be well. Take care of yourselves, and keep fighting the good fight. Be well.